being a ventriloquist, it's kind of like a different life than like a lot of normal lives. Basically, for a word like basketball, you replace the B's with D's. So you want to say dasket doll. So you're going basket doll, and then you're thinking the letter B. There might be the possibility that you might not be good either. And that's like the worst thing. If being a bad ventriloquist is way worse than being a bad comedian.
I think the first question has to be, right, obviously, like, how do you do this?
Well, I would say being a ventriloquist, it's kind of like a different life than like a lot of normal lives. It takes a lot of dedication, but just the actual ventriloquism aspect of doing it is mostly all about using your tongue and breath control and using your diaphragm. So I do a lot of tongue twister exercises, and I usually will, put my tongue on the roof of my mouth when I'm trying to say a word. And that's pretty much all of what ventriloquism is. It's all about like just using your tongue and kind of making sure your lips aren't shaky or anything like that, making it really steady. It's a long explanation. Like I've been doing this for I want to say 13 years now, ever since I was like 12 years old. So it's been a long journey for sure.
How long did it take before you got good at it? Like, good enough where you could actually do this kind of in public, kind of thing?
It's interesting. I would say that because I feel like when you're young, you can kind of pick up things and learn things a lot quicker than when you're older. And so when I started, I would say I didn't really, because I started performing, I started at 12 and I started performing when I was 14. And looking back at those tapes of me performing, I performed at a ventriloquist convention. So that's kind of like how I got introduced to it. I would go to these conventions where there was about 500 ventriloquists all in one place, and it's in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, this is like a normal thing. So that really was what got me into it. And so I felt comfortable performing around other ventriloquists. And I would even say at 14, I was pretty decent performing, but I think I really started getting good once I moved out to LA and started doing like comedy clubs and stuff like that, because that was like the real test of, okay, you have to be funny and you have to do lip control and all that stuff. So I'd say probably like where I felt like I was like a kind of more rounded performer, like in my like 22, I would say.
So is it kind of like magicians where there's a secret and you don't necessarily tell people, or is it pretty much you can look up on the internet like how to become a ventriloquist?
Yeah, I would say that most ventriloquists are self-taught. I haven't met a single ventriloquist that had a teacher or somebody like teaching them ventriloquism, unless sometimes pageant, people in pageants, when they want to do a ventriloquist act, they'll have a teacher. But I would say most ventriloquists who just want to do it as an art form are all self-taught. Like I started out. What got me into ventriloquism was watching Goosebumps, the one with the slappy dummy, and my friend was so afraid of the dummy, and I wasn't afraid. I just thought like I want one of those, and I asked my dad. I was like, "Do you have a ventriloquist dummy?" And he was just like, "Yes," and he actually did have one in his garage. So I started practicing with that. It was like an old Jerry Mahoney dummy that Paul Winchell used to use, ventriloquist from his childhood. And so I just started practicing with that, scaring my brother, kind of just walking around the house doing like stupid little acts. And yeah, I would say most ventriloquists kind of start out that way, just kind of experimenting and just talking to themselves, as weird as that sounds.
Were you surprised that your dad had a ventriloquist dummy in the house?
Looking back at it, I think I should have been surprised, but as a 12-year-old, I think I was just really happy that he had one.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as being one of those things where you're like, "Oh, awesome, you've got it," and then later in life, you're like, "Why did you do
Yes,
that?"
exactly.
That's not it's a little unexpected,
Exactly. I'm
right?
like, wait, that's not like a. I don't think every parent has a doll like that talks.
So when you do it, right? So are you talking the same way? You're just doing it more. Your tongue is essentially performing the duties of both your mouth and your tongue. Does this make any
Yeah.
sense? You're essentially talking without moving your
Yeah,
mouth.
exactly. So when I'm talking and doing ventriloquism, it's especially on stage, it's kind of like compare it to juggling because sometimes I've had instances where I will have the puppet's voice will come out of my mouth and I won't even subconscious. I'll be like, oh, like I just did the puppet's voice. I wasn't trying to do that. And but it's like it's doing comedy and focusing on not moving your lips and controlling a puppet. So when I'm doing it, it's almost now it's like second nature. It's like the two kind of brains basically, like the puppet brain and my brain. But I also have to keep like conscious of not moving my mouth as well. It's like a constant conversation. So if I'm like, hey, what's up? Oh, nothing. You good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Like it's just like this back and forth like dialogue as far as like just how like you would talk to somebody. It's confusing. There's a lot of little parts to it that you kind of learn as you get into like I'd say like year 5 of being a ventriloquist.
Now, do you have some kind of your vocal cords are special? You have this uniquely shaped tongue. Your whatever. Is there something physical?
I would say that it's straight practice because I don't think I was born with any like unique tongue or anything like that. I would say that I was always like a performer as a kid. Like I did acting and other stuff before ventriloquism. But the reason that I pursued it is I knew that I was good at it. Like I knew that I was better at ventriloquism than acting. And I knew that if I didn't like capitalize on it and something that I was genuinely truly good at, because you can be a good actor and never make it or never kind of make an impact. But I figured if I'm just good at ventriloquism, this is something that not many people do, and I really really enjoy the art form. Then I might as well go for it. I think it's just like being passionate about anything. There's different vocal techniques that you can do to warm up. Like usually I'll breathe in deep so I can have my airflow coming from my diaphragm out through my mouth because a lot of times what happens on stage is I'll get too throaty and sometimes I'll run out of air, if that makes sense. So I'll be on stage and I'll be telling a joke and it'll be like, well, I need it. And I have to like take a breath. I'm like, so it's really good it's kind of like being an opera singer. You have to like have all your air come out or else, so I've never done longer than a 30-minute set. And I see ventriloquists do like an hour and a half. And I'm like, man, that's really hard to do like a whole hour and a half because you just have to have constant lung control and breath control as far as being a performer. I've heard of ventriloquists not speaking to anybody the entire day up until their performance because they just want to save all of their vocal energy.
Why is it so much harder? Just because of the way that you have to speak kind of from the diaphragm, or is it just
It's because it's because I feel like it's more concentrated. Like I honestly am like completely out of breath, like just exhausted after a show.
so one thing I've noticed whenever I've like looked at a ventriloquist, right? Their mouth always seems to be just a little bit open. Does your mouth have to be just a little bit open, or is that like this is just what happens?
If I feel like if your mouth's completely closed, it'll just kind of just be like mumbling sounds. But I feel like the true ventriloquist can get their mouth to be slightly open, but it looks still a little natural. You see a lot of ventriloquists like smiling, and they'll be like, "Hey, how's it going? It's good to see you," you know, and it just doesn't look natural because they just have this big smile on the whole time. So I try to like mix it up. I'll try to like have a neutral face, and when I think something's funny, if the puppet's saying something funny, I'll kind of like smile while they're talking, and you know, just try to keep the face as natural as possible.
So give me some leeway on this question because I think I'm going to phrase it terribly and possibly offensively. I don't mean it that way. I'm just trying to ask the question, right? So, like, is being a ventriloquist, I'll be dramatic, an easier path to stardom, so to speak, than not? Like, right? Like, if you're going to be a comedian, it's really hard to be a comedian, but it's maybe a little bit easier if you're a ventriloquist comedian.
I would say no. I would say yes and no because the reason I think it's harder is because you have to dedicate first to being a ventriloquist, right? So if you're going down the road of being a ventriloquist and you're not fully dedicated, and there might be the possibility that you might not be good either. And that's like the worst thing. If being a bad ventriloquist is way worse than being a bad comedian, in my opinion, because it has a way worse like, oh, like this guy, like it's just even explaining it to people that don't know like what I do when I tell them, it's like I feel like I almost constantly like just get this like this judgment, I'd say, you know. And that's something that doesn't happen when you're a comedian. When you're like, oh, I'm a stand-up, everyone's like, oh, that's cool, like what clubs do you perform at? When I'm like, oh, like I'm a ventriloquist, they're like, oh, like, do you like talk to your dolls when no one's around? You know what I mean? Like, it just comes with it's different territory. It comes with a whole set of different questions and judgments.
Why do you think that is that people kind of are like that reaction you talked about, like, oh, you're a ventriloquist? Like, where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from the whole doll thing. I think that a lot of people don't like dolls and they're afraid of them, and some people just don't like that. Also, I would say some people think, I would say it's kind of more of like a second rate kind of thing of comedy as far as like prop comedy. So some people are like, oh, you're using a prop. It's kind of like a crutch on stage. You're not just, you know, going out there being yourself.
How important is the puppet? Right? Like, do you put a lot of thought into like, okay, I want it to look like this. It has to be like this size. Like, is there anything that has to be specific about the puppet?
Dude, I would say that, you know, it's weird. A lot of ventriloquists get way too wrapped up in the puppet, and they'll forget that you actually have to be funny, and you'll have to be good at manipulating the puppet and you know, like making it look alive. Because you could take a sock, you could take your hand, you could take an orange and make it look real if you're just a good ventriloquist. So the puppet itself is important, but I'd say the more important aspect is being funny and just being a good ventriloquist. Because there has been ventriloquists, some of the best ventriloquists have used very like not expensive things, very like low end things, and made them look really real. Like one of my favorite ventriloquists, Nina Conti, she's a ventriloquist in the UK, and she uses a little monkey puppet that was like a souvenir at like the Rainforest Cafe. Like, as far as just buying a good character, that's something that's really difficult to do for ventriloquism, because it ranges. Like, there's some puppets like that are okay that you could get for like $30, and then there's ventriloquist dummies that are $6,000 that a lot of ventriloquists have, and they're more like collectors. They have a collection of ventriloquist dummies that are thousands of dollars that I wish I could have, but they have them because that's just what they do. They just collect ventriloquist dummies.
But there's not anything in the dummy or the puppet that helps you, right? It's not like this thing's $6,000 because it's got super modulated voice deconstruction, right? It's there's nothing the dummy or the puppet is actually doing, right?
No, exactly. Having a very complex ventriloquist dummy won't really help you as a ventriloquist. It can help the performance aspect of it if you want something with more animations. Like there are some really cool ventriloquist dummies that have moving eyes, raising eyebrows. There's ones that stick out their tongue. There's ones that can make their upper lip go up. And those are the ones that I think the most expensive ventriloquist dummy that I've heard of was like 35,000. Yeah, because of the rarity of it and because of how many animations it can do. Like its nose could light up red. Its like hair can go up. There's some crazy ventriloquist dummies. The coolest like dummy place that I've been to. This like sounds funny, like dummy place, but the coolest place I've been to is there's a ventriloquist dummy museum in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and it's this like small like few little buildings. And I mean, if you had a phobia of like dolls, that this would be like your absolute nightmare if you went there. And you walk in and there's just probably like 50 or 60 dummies just sitting in chairs, just kind of like lifeless. And they all have so much history. So if you're a ventriloquist, you can take your puppet there and kind of put it to rest, as people would say, because it has all the dummies and all their former ventriloquists that used to use them all kind of laid out. So they have like Jeff Dunham's old puppets, Terry Fader's, all the ventriloquists. And then there are some genuinely scary dummies, and I don't really get scared of puppets that easily, but there are some dummies that are from, I want to say, either the 17 or 1800s that have real human teeth and real human hair. And that is where I'm like, okay, that is pretty scary.
Yeah. Right? I can kind of see why people have a certain, like, we love to like anthropomorphize animals, but if it's too much like us, then it's like, ooh, we kind of don't like that
exactly
much, right?
And that's
like,
where I think that sometimes the ventriloquist dummy is a little bit more beneficial than a puppet in some instances. Like I noticed when I was performing at clubs more, when I would use, say, like a bird puppet to tell human jokes, they wouldn't land as well as if I had like the human puppet telling the same jokes. Because people are like, they can see that it's a human, if that makes sense. And they're like, oh yeah, that's it's more relatable. That's like a guy up there. You know, they kind of forget that it's fake a little bit.
So, I guess two-part question. Can you make a full-time living as a ventriloquist? I'm assuming the answer is yes, because there's pretty famous ventriloquists. But let's say you're A-level comedian. Does an A-level comedian, is he going to get or she going to get paid more than an A-level ventriloquist?
Like that really depends. I would say it's definitely, if you're a good ventriloquist, like an A-level ventriloquist that's really good and has good routines, it's definitely easier than an A-level comedian just because it's just more of a unique act, I would say. Like I remember I was doing a bigger show at the Hollywood Palladium a long time ago, like probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And I would just do all these open mics to prepare. And, you know, some of them were good and then others were just like dead silence. Or if I'd be happy if I got like one of the comedians in the audience. Because it's basically all comedians watching other comics go up and perform. And so when they see like a guy with a doll on stage, they're like, wow, this is different. You know, I've never seen this before, ever.
Yeah, that would be brutal audience, right? Because it's filled with people who don't want to laugh.
100%, yeah.
You know, it's kind of like that. He's not better than
me. And that's where a lot of the times, I almost felt like, man, I don't know what's better practice, because if as far as a stand-up goes, it's less of an act and more of being genuine on stage. I still try to be genuine, but what I do is an act. It is like acting, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, yeah.
stand-up is being real and being kind of like raw on stage, where people can see those funny sides of you. A lot of the times I was like, man, I could have just practiced this at home and I would have felt less sad.
Are you ready for some listener submitted harder questions?
Yes.
What is the hardest word, letter, or sound to say? What is the easiest?
It's different for a lot of ventriloquists. A lot of ventriloquists struggle with the letter B. I feel like I do well with the letter B, like basketball. Basically, for a word like basketball, you replace the B's with D's. So you want to say dasket doll. So you're going basket doll, and then you're thinking the letter B in your brain. So you're saying the letter D, but thinking B, and then you're putting it together, and you're like basket doll, basket doll, basketball, basketball, basketball. You know, you kind of just think of the letter. So that's what I'm doing is I'm thinking of the letter. For me, I don't really think the B is that hard, but I think the letter P is really hard. For P, you're replacing it with a T. Like the hardest word for me is people because it's two P's. It's like people, people, and I really do not. I try to never write that word into my act. An easy word would be words that just words that you don't have to like move your lips for. So you could say something like sun. You don't have to move your lips for sun. Just sun. You know. You could say hand. Hand. You know, you don't like. It's just any word that you don't have to really move your lips for, because you have to move your lips for like letters like W, B, P, and M.
And then I'm imagining like when you sit down and you write your act, so to speak. Like you ventriloquists are purposely, ooh, don't want to say that word. Like I can't say people. I have to say individuals or something like that. Like will you specifically kind of write around it?
For sure. Yeah. Sometimes I won't realize it because I won't be doing the ventriloquism until after. And then I will realize, oh, I use people too much. I gotta replace that word. Or I use everyone too much. Gotta replace that word.
Who's the Michael Jordan of ventriloquism?
Ooh, alive or dead?
Give us both.
Okay, I would say probably the best of all time would just be Edgar Bergen, just because he kind of revolutionized it. As far as in the vaudeville era, he was mostly known for radio, and a lot of people thought that his puppet Charlie McCarthy was a real person on the radio, until he started doing shows and live performances, and then that was kind of the joke. They saw that he had a ventriloquist dummy, and so he kind of revolutionized it as far as like doing it in vaudeville and performing in like the live circuit in because yeah, ventriloquism was around before stand-up, I would say, because he did that whole vaudeville era type of stuff. So I would say him for sure, just because he was in movies. He was huge in the 50s. But as far as alive today, I would say it's definitely Jeff Dunham, as far as somebody who has just reached that like insane level of fame that a ventriloquist has never reached before. Like Jeff Dunham's more famous than any ventriloquist ever, and I think that he kind of downplays it anytime he does an interview or anything like that. But he definitely, no one's ever been like that mainstream. I think he has like 7 comedy specials, and I remember I was watching his show at the Greek Theater, and it's just his performance ability to be able to like get through, like I said, that long stretch of time without getting vocally winded is just insane.
Do people ever try to call you out? Like, I saw your mouth move.
I would say not really, because I don't really mess up that much. I would say, and that's kind of cocky of me to say, but I've never had a moment where I've really like moved my lips. I would be able to say like, if I did really mess up, I'd be like, yeah, I definitely, could see my lips moving, but I try to make it so it's, you can't. I would say that's the whole goal. I've never had anyone call me out for something like, when I was a kid. Yeah. When I was like doing those shows, there would be like judges and they'd be like, oh, you could work on your lip movement. And that just like stuck with me. I was like, this will never happen again.
Do you ever accidentally do it in real life? Like, not to mess with people, but it's just purely an accident.
Honestly, no, I never, for sure. I've never accidentally done it. And every time I'm doing ventriloquism, it's like a muscle, like you're doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right? What is people, like,
Yeah.
if you do it just on the street, right, when somebody's not suspecting it, what's generally people's kind of reaction?
They're like generally just like confused, sometimes scared. And I have a video that really blew up on TikTok that I did. I walked up to this guy and started doing it, and he thought I was like doing witchcraft in front of him. And when I told him it was just like a video and I was a ventriloquist, then he understood. So a lot of people don't really understand it. But then other people just kind of think that there's something wrong with me.
Has anybody ever thought that, like, the dummy was real?
No one's ever thought the dummy was real. I have had people say like, wow, like I really forgot that you were with a puppet. Like I really thought that, that puppet, like I forgot that you were controlling it. So it's that whole illusion kind of thing as far as like the magic aspect of it. And I have had an old woman come up to me after a show and say, I loved your act. I couldn't watch you the whole time because I have a fear of dolls. So I had to look down the whole time. But I heard everything you said and it was funny.
That's a good compliment, but an interesting compliment, right? That's pretty much all the questions that I have. Is there anything else you think we missed, or what's coming up next for you?
I'm about to hit 1 million followers on TikTok, so that's exciting. Really excited about that. It's been an insane journey, and it's definitely really, really helped my career as far as, just accelerating it forward and all that stuff. And yeah, just writing a whole new act right now, getting back into the swing of performing live shows again now that COVID restrictions are lifted in LA. As far as in most comedy clubs, some are still a little bit, you still have to have a vaccine, but that just goes without saying for a comedy club at least. Yeah, so I'm excited to get back into the swing of things and just start performing again.